The U.S. Census Bureau says homeschooling doubled in less than a 5-month span with the onset of the coronavirus pandemic. The growing trend of families teaching their children at home is rising, particularly among the Hispanic and Black communities. One Latino mother shares her reasons for educating her children at home in our This Catholic Life report.
The two factors that led me to homeschooling, one for my oldest is having more time to do more fun things so she can be a kid, and for my younger one, it's getting her the help that she needed.
Gisela Quiñones, founder of the Latinos Homeschooling Group, says she began homeschooling years prior to the pandemic because of concerns about her children's educational needs being met and their quality of life.
Focus on what their talents are.
She also wanted her children to have a better understanding of their Latino roots.
We would reserve a room in a library, and there a couple moms and I would give classes on just art from like Panama. We would give a brief geography and history discussion on different countries in Latin America.
As the pandemic swept across the nation and schools were forced to hold classes online.
That's when a lot of people from the country started joining the group online.
Many families began homeschooling and continued even after lockdowns were lifted.
Homeschooling growing across all ethnic groups, Hispanic, Black, Asian, in tremendous numbers. We have seen the numbers absolutely double and in some cases triple in many states all over the country.
The U.S. Census Bureau says that 11.1% of families with school-aged children were homeschooled at the start of the 2020 school year, double from the spring of the 2019 school year when it was 5.4%. Not only are the numbers steadily growing for homeschooling, so are the resources.
We see tremendous infrastructure support, and it's growing. Curriculum companies have grown and are growing, and new ideas are starting. You see lots of people providing tutoring services.
And an opportunity to incorporate faith into a family's day.
At 3 o'clock, we would do Divine Mercy. So we would, the Chaplet of Divine Mercy. So that was really nice to get my children and another family. We would call each other at 3 o'clock, stop whatever we were doing, and pray together.
Our coverage of this issue was based on an article written by our colleague Lauretta Brown of the National Catholic Register. Lauretta, thank you for joining us to share what you discovered. We heard Gisela Quiñones in this piece say that she wanted to meet the needs of her children. What did you discover as you were writing this piece?
So many of the parents I talked to had initial reasons for homeschooling related to the pandemic. They talked about masking throughout the day at school, including during sports and things, and disruptive schedules of in-person and virtual learning kind of mixed in a way that was just they didn't feel that was good for their kids. But it was interesting because they talked to me about how as they actually started homeschooling, they really got to experience and learn about their child and the way their child learns. Many of them found undiagnosed learning problems and really loved that they were able to customize things into what their child was learning and grow closer as a family. People talked about that, about being able to impart the faith. So it's interesting. I mean, some of their reasons sounded like they shifted as they actually got into it. They saw this is so good for my child and good for my family.
Rediscovering their children, rediscovering who they are as a family. I know you mentioned praying together was something that happened often as well. What do you think about this demographic? I know you and I are both Latinas, right? The future of the church. How does homeschooling serve the future of the church?
Well, I was really impressed with the Latinos homeschooling group. I talked to some of the moms in that, and the emphasis on they had bilingual education options and learning about Hispanic heritage and history. And it was really cool to see that they're really customizing their learning to being able to include things like that. And I think it shows, family values, but also tradition is important. They want to impart those things. And also, I mean, just like anyone, they want the best education for their child. And many of these parents I talked to discussed things about, bad school options and testing requirements, different things that they disagreed with or had trouble with. And they just were so happy to be able to really focus on their child and help their child thrive in areas where maybe they didn't have the best options in terms of schools.
Right, and I know our church teaches that the parent is the primary educator, so rediscovering that calling for these parents is also a great opportunity. There are different studies and findings about the effects of homeschooling on the quality of education, like you mentioned, but also their performance. What can you tell us about that?
Yeah, so there have been recent studies. I think a growing body of research is showing that homeschoolers have very positive outcomes in terms of academics, and I know there was a recent review of peer-reviewed studies that I kind of took a look at, and it showed that 11 out of 14 peer-reviewed studies were showing that homeschoolers were outperforming more conventionally schooled children on testing, academic outcomes. And then there was another review that I looked at, just a review of existing studies, that showed that college GPA and college retention were also better, that had better outcomes among homeschooled children.
Well, that's very encouraging. Thank you so much, Lauretta, both for your piece and for coming here to explain this to us.
Thanks for having me, Montse.
Of course. To provide context on a broader level of the impact of homeschooling on the Catholic school system, we're joined now by Mary Pat Donoghue, Executive Director, Secretariat of Catholic Education for the United States Conference of Catholic Bishops. Mary Pat, the pandemic has ushered in an interesting time for Catholic schools, with enrollment going up, with the backdrop of various schools closing down alongside parishes. Has homeschooling impacted this in any way?
Montse, yes, thank you. There have certainly been impacts to our Catholic schools, and I'm sure that the move of many parents, the decision to homeschool, has been a factor in that. However, I will say that this entire experience, I think, has invited our schools to think a little differently about Catholic education, so that we recognize families who make the choice to homeschool are still engaging in Catholic education. And we have situations wherein many of our schools are looking at creative ways to partner with those families, since it certainly does support the church's teaching that the parent is the primary educator.
So then supporting and creating these collaborative environments. A majority of these Catholic schools are comprised of minority students, a demographic where home education is really starting to grow. How do you think the growth in homeschooling will impact the Catholic school system in this way, in terms of outreach to minority families?
Sure. Well, I think for one thing, it certainly will cause us to pay even more attention to those trends and to what minority families are actually looking for. Oftentimes, I think it's a huge error to make assumptions, even based on experiences that are, becoming old. But as the world changes, as the culture and the climate changes, we need to be engaged and listening to all of our families, and especially to our minority families, since they are traditionally underserved by Catholic schools, although there is great interest in them to receive Catholic education.
Are there specific differences that you've seen in those needs that they have for their children or even for their families?
I think it's the same as fundamentally most parents are looking for. They want something, they want to trust that the school that they choose is going to support their values and morals, that they want to partner with us to form their children in a way that they can be happy in this world, but also learn to serve others, to find their joy in being who God created them to be. So I think that's a pretty universal concept. Now, it changes a bit in areas where, for example, in the Southwest, where we have a growing immigrant population, but very, very little infrastructure. We just don't have a whole lot of schools. We have a lot of schools in the Northeast and a shrinking population. So the invitation here is to think creatively about how Catholic education can be delivered to families if it's not possible to put them in a traditional brick and mortar school. And we're beginning to see those types of models emerge, hybrid models and other types of approaches.
A lot of the time we hear people paint this very dire picture of Catholic schools with exactly what you're describing. Some places are shutting down, some places need to open up. Can you give us hope in terms of what we're expecting and what this shift really means for Catholic schools?
Absolutely. Well, there's tremendous hope. First of all, the Holy Spirit is always active and working and inviting and calling us. We are seeing a couple of trends that I think are wonderful for Catholic schools writ large and for our families. And one of those is the desire of more and more of our schools and dioceses to rediscover the Church's beautiful and rich and unique educational tradition and sort of represent that with the understanding that much of modern American education is founded on philosophies that are, in opposition in many ways to what the Church believes about the formation of children. I think that's a great sign of hope. The recognition of parents as primary educators, they themselves have recognized because they have seen things differently during a pandemic, certainly is a strength and a call for all of us to partner together in this critical time to form children. And again, as I said, to be conscious that the needs of emerging communities, the needs of immigrant communities may be different. And the Church can find a way, as it always has for centuries, to respond that may look different than the brick and mortar structures that we have had for so many decades.
That's right. Well, coming together and collaborating through this synodal process that we all have to be a part of to find the right answers to these questions. Thank you so much, Mary Pat.
Absolutely, Montse. It was wonderful to be with you.
Same here. God bless you.